You know, what I love about royal history are the things that, particularly if you've been involved in the same area as where royal history has taken place, it does hold something of a different meaning. I was very lucky because on a number of occasions I've hosted various events at the Lancaster Ballroom at the Savoy Hotel, the glittering Savoy Hotel. And what's fascinating is when you go behind the scenes, there's wonderful black and white pictures of many of the stars, everybody from Cary Grant, Audrey Hepburn, Marilyn Monroe, Laurence Olivier, and they've all sat in the ballroom hosting big press conferences. This was during the heyday of the 1940s and 1950s. And this was because the Savoy was, well, like Claridge's and of course latterly the Dorchester, the number one place for the rich and famous to come along and sell their wares, you know, the big films. And it was easier then for them to sit down with somebody, a journalist, and come in and say, well, interview me here. Of course, many people know about that infamous press conferences with Marilyn and Laurence Olivier. It was very clear as Vivien Leigh was standing in the wings that consequently she played the part on stage, and now the younger, blonder, and some might say more famous Marilyn Monroe was there to take her place. Apparently he could cut the atmosphere with a knife, naturally. But of course Marilyn made sure she got all the headlines by suddenly a strap busting forth, and everybody reported on that. Oh yes, this is the power of show business. And it's the power of show business when you look at stories that, well, basically regard senior members of the British monarchy. And there was none more controversial in many respects than none other than His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip. If you remember his very famous remark, one goes out with actresses or steps out with actresses, one doesn't marry them. Apparently that was the sage advice that he gave, of course, to his grandson, none other than the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry. Shame though that Harry didn't take that advice. But what was interesting, talking to someone very close inside the Savoy Hotel, was the fact that a story we thought we knew all about actually had a very different, well, narrative. As ever, let me explain. Morning chums, lovely to see you. Thank you so much for your time today, and welcome one and all brand new subscribers. As ever, nice to welcome you back on a beautiful, glittering, sunny day here in the United Kingdom. You know what I mean about history though? Have you done that? If you've been on one of those tours, you've stepped off the coach, and then you go in somebody's mansion or house, and you realise that for instance, whether it's the Brontes or Jane Austen, they wrote that book that's gone on to sell millions around the world, and it all happened in that very room. That's how I feel each time I get invited very nicely back to the Savoy to host various things. Now, the Duke of Edinburgh, had a very, shall we say, colourful life, right? To say the least. And everybody wants to talk about that particular side of it. I'm more really interested in the fact that I thought he was an excellent consort to none other than Queen Elizabeth. They had a marriage that worked for them 100%, and you could still see the twinkling in their eyes many years into their vintage years, as it were. It was a wonderful love story. But the thing is, the Duke of Edinburgh was very much guided by Lord Louis Mountbatten, and there was a particular story that really would not go away, and this was the celebrated beauty, actress, Gainsborough film star Pat Kirkwood, Patricia Kirkwood, right? A sort of rather strange background herself, apparently fudged her age on many occasions, got into various things, and sort of found fame during the wartime prior to movie roles by singing Cole Porter's My Heart Belongs to Daddy. And it's interesting this because you see, everybody cites that Prince Philip and Pat Kirkwood actually met in a dressing room at the London Hippodrome Theatre, where she was appearing in a major musical, a smash hit musical. But according to sources, that actually wasn't the first time that they met. Oh no. You see, really, what happened was Pat Kirkwood had already enjoyed a lot of success. She was what you might call an opportunistic young beauty, right? Enabled herself to be next to Ivan Novello, Noel Coward, all the big names of the day. And even at a very young age, opened at the Desert Inn, Las Vegas, to great success. Phenomenal success, in fact. So much so that the beautiful and very prestigious Savoy Hotel decided to invite her back to London to appear in cabaret at the Lancaster Ballroom, right? And it was here that Prince Philip first met Pat Kirkwood. And this was, you've got to remember, this is a totally different time. The ballroom, a wonderful sort of stage, plus a major dance floor, and you were encouraged to work the tables. and work the tables Pat did. And here's where the story gets really interesting, because not only did Prince Philip return, allegedly, 3 times to see this wonderful act, but in fact the Queen's father, King George, he popped along too, without Queen Elizabeth, I might point out. Now what you have to remember is Princess Elizabeth clearly was very, busy in her own life, whatever, and never really put too much strain or restraint on the Duke of Edinburgh. But this is again where you realise the power of the connection, the royals, all that sort of stuff. You see, you won't know this, but the BBC, looking to gain some notoriety, some publicity, all of that sort of stuff, they decided, having seen this wonderful act in the Lancaster Ballroom at the Savoy Hotel, well, Pat Kirkwood would be the ideal person to launch her own show on BBC TV. In fact, she was the very first female on BBC TV to have her own show. And the simple fact was, the tagline was going to be loved by the royals, liked by the public. And at the 11th hour, they had to change it, simply because, according to an inside source at the Savoy, an excellent historian I might point out, the bottom line was, well, they couldn't say that because nobody could factually prove it. The thing is, it can be proven, but of course nobody wanted to offend the British monarchy. And it's a funny thing, isn't it, when you consider, like today, how the BBC openly disregard for the correct title of Her Royal Highness Catherine the Princess of Wales. They're allowed to do that, but back then they couldn't even use a factual account of the fact that not only had Prince Philip been along to see this wonderful, vibrant young actress in cabaret, but so had King George too. And consequently, the show wasn't the glittering success that they first thought. Interesting though, agree? Neil Sean in the very heart of the United Kingdom.